table and let's talk about the great Def Jam, but let's talk about Russell Simmons, man, and how he gave us and being the progenitor of so many great artists, the LLs and all of the Def Jam, the legacy, man. However you want to open
Yeah.
that up, I'm gonna allow you to open up, sir. Floor is yours.
Yeah. Of course, man. And have to first before we even get into that, we talked about Diddy and his allegations.
Yes,
It's
sir.
only fair that we talk about, Uncle Rush has some things that's clouding him as well. We all know he's not in the country right now.
Right.
He's hiding. I mean, some people say he's hiding out based on those allegations that he has. So we do have to say, one, we don't condone any of those things that they're
No.
saying about him, should they be true. But allegedly, he's had some things accused against him as well. And there's been some pretty salacious things. But we're going to talk about Russell Simmons, as you stated, hip hop mogul, record executive, entrepreneur, really visionary. And it starts with Def Jam. And honestly, it doesn't even start just with him. If you're going to talk about Russell Simmons and you're going to talk about Def Jam, you also have to talk about the other guy and the other half of the equation that was there. And that's none other than the legendary Rick Rubin. The two of them linking up while Rick Rubin was at NYU. Them getting associated. Some people, of course, say, they got linked up by DJs and a few other people, but they get together to start this record label, and they create this record label, which will become Def Jam. Now, this to me, Def Jam is the first, I would say, became the first urban and also hip hop label that strictly focused on urban and hip hop music. Now, in the beginning, a lot of folks don't know, because of Rick Rubin's background, they also had some rock acts that they had there as well. This would lead to the first couple of signings that made Def Jam really as a legacy and as a label. Def Jam, though, was important for many different reasons. As we stated, of course, it's probably hip hop's first super label.
Okay.
And it's right at the beginning when hip hop is coming out of its infancy and getting into its childhood, so to speak. Def Jam gives us, and you can say obviously things about Curtis Blow. We all know Curtis Blow was the first solo rap star to have a major label deal with Mercury Records, and he dropped in 1980 and gave us records like The Breaks, and became a legend in his own right. But you can say that Def Jam is responsible for giving us hip hop's first breakthrough mainstream solo superstar, and none other than James Todd Smith, Cool J. And let's also take it to the other half of this.
Come on.
They also give us one of the more pioneering groups in hip hop that you cannot ignore, and their work cannot be ignored when we talk about the early days of hip hop during that first decade plus that hip hop was as a genre and in the public consciousness, and that's the Beastie Boys. And you have to look at that. That's harkening a lot back to their origin and roots was to Rick's rock roots. So you're sort of taking the best of both. Rush from Queens, LL Cool J from Queens, Beastie Boys, Jewish guys from Brooklyn. You're taking the sensibilities of both these founders of Def Jam and giving Def Jam their foundation, really starting right there. And over that next decade, you saw some game-changing acts come from that label. Talk about the acts that have come through just heading into that first decade of Def Jam, starting right around 1984. LL, Beastie Boys. But then you also have the signing of probably one of the most impactful groups in hip-hop history, Public Enemy.
Yes, sir.
Then you have other acts that follow afterwards. An act that definitely shook up the scene when they came along with their style, the stylizing of the bald heads and the hardcore music, the yelling, the black boots, the hoodies with Onyx.
Yes, sir.
Next decade, you then also get consequential acts that joined the label as a result of their labels shuttering with EPMD. Then you also have Redman, Method Man, going over to the West Coast and getting an artist like Warren G.
Come on now.
Stepping into the R&B scene and getting an act like Montel Jordan.
Come on.
Stepping into the new scene, stepping into the new school and getting an act like Foxy Brown. And then also, for good measure, pulling in a generational talent and one Earl Simmons, the late, great DMX. Oh, and by the way, right around that time when they were getting into that new school of hip hop in the mid to late 90s, they happened to get a partnership with this guy couple of guys with a record label that they started. And one of those guys became one of the greatest hip hop artists of all time. A lot of people will say he's definitely got to be within your top 2, if not your top 5. And that's with Rockefeller Records and Jay-Z.
Come on now.
Also got other acts coming in to make them relevant, signing an act like Ja Rule. I remember this. It's right around the Survival of the Illest time, that tour with DMX, having an act like Ja Rule on there as well, when things were really starting to come around. So musically, they started in this when hip-hop was in its childhood. When it matured into preteen and also to their teen years, they're continuing to stay relevant. All this while, you also have LL continuously putting out records during this time. You know, we talked about the radios, the Bads, Walk with the Panthers, the
Come on,
Mama's Gonna Knock You Out,
I Need Love, come on,
40 shots to the dome, the Mr. Smiths, Phenomenons. But then to be able to get acts like Foxy Brown, then to bring it into Montel Jordan, an act like Case as well on the R&B side. So they're continuing to stay relevant when a lot of record labels during that time that were hip hop focused were folding because they were struggling with distribution, struggling with cash flow, struggling with relevancy. And Def Jam outlasted all of them.
That's right.
And as a matter of fact, they ended up serving as a blueprint really for a lot of those labels we look in the 90s that started making names for themselves in the Bad Boys, the Death Rows, you know, seeing labels come up like Cash Money, like No Limit, like So Def,
Rap a lot, all of them guys,
Face, all these different ones. And what it also did was allow for a lot of companies go on to take distribution on with these labels and give them the avenue, because having a label is one thing. If you didn't have distribution, you ain't have nothing. Imagine being a drug dealer and not being able to push your product. That's what distributors do. That's what, when you have a Sony Music, when you had back then a CBS Records, when you had a major label that was willing to basically put their stamp and say, we are backing this product for distribution, that's what made it important. And you look at what the legacy is of the other pop culture phenomenons that Def Jam brought about. The movie Crush Groove in 1985.
Classic.
Staple. Classic, man.
Come on.
Classic. Something that introduced us to LL Cool J to a lot of us in the first place.
Damn right.
You know? Def Comedy Jam.
Come on, man.
Launching pad for so many great comics that we would see over the next 2 to 3 decades. You know, seeing it, the first one being hosted, but the first season being hosted by the likes of none other than Martin Lawrence himself. You know,
yes, sir.
Entertainer Chris Rock hosting it, seeing acts like Bernie Mac.
Come on now, come on, B Cox, talk your shit. Let's go.
But then you go from that. There's Def Comedy Jam, then Def Poetry Slam. You know, and seeing, even while as short-lived as it was, how that captured the attention of all these different people. And then this is not showing up on network television, but showing up on HBO, you know. And you know, Def Comedy Jam was bad, because when that was coming out, I was in elementary school. I was not supposed to be up watching Def Comedy Jam, because they used to get riggedy raw on that thing, boy. They used to get riggedy raw. It was okay letting me watch Comic View, but Def Comedy Jam, when I was a kid, no, you're not watching that. That was one of those things you had to sneak to get up in the middle of the night and catch the replay to catch it, so that you make sure you go to school and talk to everybody else about what happened on Def Comedy Jam. You know, all those things, and all the other different business ventures aligned with it. Fat Farm Clothing, you know, things that are being involved with that. The partnerships that they had with different record labels. We talked about the partnership with Rockefeller that happened right around 1997, 98. Big power move for the label, for an upcoming record label, and one of the upcoming artists during that time, and Jay-Z, which would add more acts later on, which would eventually make Rockefeller a player for the rest of that decade heading into the new millennium. But then you had Rush associated labels, which brought on, of course, people like Redman. You had Island, which became a part of Def Jam, with Island Def Jam. The partnership with Murder Inc., which brought Ja Rule and all the different Murder Inc. arcs, and Ashanti and Vita and all those folks right into our consciousness as well. I mean, the cultural impact of it is absolutely undeniable. They really laid the blueprint for the first hip hop super label, for it to be okay to get behind a hip hop act. So people weren't saying, oh, hip hop's just this novelty that's going to be around for a decade and it's going to flame out like disco. Like, no, this was here to stay. And Def Jam was a big part of that because culturally, what they did for hip hop and the thing centered around their culture of hip hop being in comedy shows, being inside of poetry slams, being with clothing, entertainment abroad, having partnerships that made sure they stay relevant throughout the decade is what made Def Jam so consequential.
Because one point on this, let's just highlight the great LL Cool J really briefly on this before we transition to the next place we're gonna go
Yeah,
to. LL, for what he did, he was the first rapper that really made in a poetical way was able to really romance these women and talk to them in a way where it didn't come off as no sucker shit. It
yeah,
came off as like, you know what, man, I can't be mad at you, James Todd, for that shit. I
yeah,
like that. I'm gonna have to say some of that player shit
yeah,
myself.
yeah,
He appealed to the ladies in such an emotional way, but he still was able to walk the fine line. Was, hey man, you know what? I'm from Queens. Ain't no bitch in me. Don't
yeah.
try it.
Oh
Mama
yeah,
said, knock your punk ass out, and that's what I will do.
yeah.
Why is it, Peacock? And you cannot answer this in that, I say with definitively because you can't speak for everyone.
Mhm.
But you being the music savant that we treasure you to be, how is it that LL is it because he was so many generations before and a forerunner of that era that people tend to forget he was a bad man on that mic.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the beginning. LL joins Def Jam as a teenager, right?
Yeah.
He's 15, I think, like close, like maybe 16 years old when he comes out with Radio, and that is a classic hip hop album off the break. Now, he lyrically and flow wise, he was ahead of his time and ahead of his peers during that
Mm,
time, right? A lot of
mm.
people don't know Jay-Z and LL are peers, right? They're the same age.
Damn, that is crazy. They are
They're the
peers. You're right.
same, they're the same age. But
That's
LL was so
crazy.
phenomenal, man, because it wasn't just that. You talked about his sensibility with the ladies, man. You know, being a good looking guy doesn't hurt. The fact that, and
No,
if you
not at all.
smooth and you have some game,
Not at
yeah,
all.
that gets the ladies in your corner. But the one thing that folks don't understand, like you said, he was a bad boy on that mic and still is a bad boy on that mic, close to being almost 60 years old now. But it was the balance. It was being able to have that way with the ladies, but then also be hard as hell on the mic to get on and do rock the bells and I need a beat and radio and bad, you know? I mean, like that's the type of things that got people psyched about it, doing booming system, you know, like and mama gonna knock you out to the break of dawn, you know, those type of songs. He had the crossover appeal, and that's why I said he was hip hop's first mainstream breakthrough solo superstar with
Thank
no disrespect to Curtis Blow whatsoever. But he was the first guy that wasn't in a group because hip hop was big on groups when it first started. We talk about all the groups that were out there, you know, Watch and even Wild Style. You see the Furious Five and the Funky Four plus one more. Um, Singing Run-D.M.C's, Treacherous Three. Everything when hip hop was about groups until they had solo superstars come out, and he was the one who did it because he didn't need the backing necessarily of a DJ, and he
you.
didn't need the backing of a group in order to do it. He was somebody
Mm.
that can get on the screen by himself or in a video on a track by himself and could captivate you just by what he was saying out of his mouth, his flow, his presence, his charisma,
Yes,
all
sir.
of
Yes,
he
sir.
really did lay the blueprint for a lot of guys who came after him, right? You could even look a few years later and seeing a guy like Big Daddy Kane, who had cachet with the ladies, who had some game, but lyrically was nasty, right? It laid the groundwork for guys like that later on to understand, like, hey, you could be a little bit of both. You could be a bad boy in that mic and talk that shit, and you can talk your shit to the ladies, man, and it can go down. Just as long as it ain't on you said ain't on no sucker shit. So
Right.
you got to love that. But he was able to do it because he was really ahead of his time, man. Flow wise, he was doing something that a lot of people weren't doing at that time, and lyrically he was great, and he's kind of always been there. And it's the full package. It's the lyrics, it's the flow, it's the presence and performance. He's going to get on, he's going to perform, whether he's on record or whether he's on stage. So that has maintained itself because that's a formula that's not going to really die out in hip hop.
Okay.
Styles may change and things may happen. If you could do those things right there, you'll always be relevant. And that's the reason why. and some duds here and there that he's had album wise. But for the most part, though, he even said it himself with the latest album project he's putting out with Q-Tip. When he said the last album he put out, when it flopped, he said, you can't be part-time in this. You got to be full-time. Now, LL's moved on. We know he's now a very accomplished actor,
Sure.
entrepreneur, all the different things that have happened now. So he's not just a kid that was from Queens that was rapping on Def Jam. He's so much more than that now. But as he said, this is what he is first. And you can't be part-time in it. You got to be full-time.
I like that, B Cox. Well said. Hip hop's first real mainstream breakout superstar, man. Because to go on from hip hop to, I mean, the guy did movies. He's had his own TV shows. Man, much respect to James Todd, man. And he was the one that was talking that shit to them ladies early on. And I'm not gonna lie, I goddamn it pattern that style. I took it in my own form, man. I said, the hell with this. Let me put my hat on. I said, because let me put my hat on, lip my goddamn lips too.
Yeah.
Oh man. Hey y'all, it's good to have B Cox back in the building. All right, B Cox, we in the state